Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Pennett. I lead the technology practice at Eisner Amper. It is our pleasure to help support the conference here, and it is also my pleasure to introduce Phillip Haid as our next presenter. He's going to be talking to us about communicating sustainability. So, Phillip, the floor is yours.
That's great. Thanks so much, John. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Great to be with you in the next 20 minutes or so. And what I want to do is talk about this question here, the sort of how do you effectively communicate your goals, your plans, your progress on sustainability, both inside your organization and on the outside, because both are equally important. And I always like to sort of start with a takeaway. And what you see on the screen here, will seem pretty obvious in saying, well, it should be credible and authentic and unique. But I think there's something very, very important that I just want to sort of start you here, because what we're finding is that there is so much critique these days, as everyone must know, around ESG and sustainability. And I will be using those terms for the purpose of today's conversation interchangeably. There's a lot of critique. You're seeing in Europe, HSBC being taken to task recently. You see Mercedes-Benz being taken to task. The list goes on. Actually, Unilever, who's been a stalwart in the sustainability space, taken to task. And a lot of it is around how they're communicating their sustainability, their ESG efforts. And so I start here in terms of a takeaway, because the notion of credible is, do you have the license to operate as an organization about what you're talking about as relates to your sustainability efforts writ large, right? So again, tying it to ESG, your environmental efforts, your social efforts, and of course your governance. Do you have the credibility on what you're saying, and will people actually buy it? And that's people buying it both internally and externally. The authenticity is about what you're actually doing on these issues, not just the commitments you're making, but the actions that you're actually taking is critically important. And then the one that's often overlooked is this idea of unique point of view. So much of what we're seeing, how you communicate sustainability today, is there's a lot of same old people doing the same things, a sea of sameness that you see on the screen here. And so if you want to stand out, it's really important that you think about a point of view. What is it that we as an organization bring to the issues that we're working on that is both unique and differentiated in how you approach it? And even if it's not completely unique, how are you saying it in a way that is authentic to your organization? So while this is incredibly obvious, what we find so often is organizations, companies are not actually thinking about these things enough when it comes to their communication of sustainability. And as a result, everyone is starting to look and sound the same, which of course can breed either just a lack of differentiation at best, or at worst, actually consumers not really believing in what you're actually doing on these issues. And so I want to talk to you quickly about sort of 10 principles, 10 ingredients that we have found in our work in working with multinationals and across North America is helpful in terms of how you actually communicate your sustainability in ways that are authentic, that are credible, and that are unique. And the first one is this idea of finding your sweet spot. Because we're moving to trying to communicate not just environment over here and your social commitments, whether it's community or your diversity, equity, inclusion commitments on the other side, because now there's a need to talk about all of them, there's the importance of creating an overarching idea. And that overarching idea has to have at its core sort of a sweet spot about what is it about your organization that connects those varying things. Because the things you're going to do on your climate commitments and the things you're going to do from a diversity, equity, inclusion, or what you're doing to give back to the community, they can be rather disparate. So how do you then connect the dots between the E, the S, and the G? And the first principle here is that you usually find that connective tissue in something that is deep in the core of the organization, whether that's a core set of values or a value that's important to you, whether that's sort of in the culture and the DNA of the organization, or maybe sometimes it's in the origin story. I put up this image of Who Gives a Crap, a great sustainable toilet paper company out of Australia. And I find like they have found their sweet spot in that they are very authentic about how they motivate both internal and external audiences to care about the world and really care about their sustainability and how they apply it to their product. And everything that they do, you see that idea, both in terms of the tonality and the fun of what they've created, but they've really found at the heart a value set that is about how they operate. And so, when you buy their products, it's automatically triggering thinking about cleaning, actually clean water supply in a number of countries. Like, they tie everything that they do. I want to show you another example. I think Danone has done a relatively good job of finding the sweet spot. If you think about One Planet, One Health, thinking about how they nourish as many people around the world to create better health, how they tie that into the environment is very, very tight. And it's really tied, when you go back to the origin of Danone and how it started, it's tied there. So I would encourage you, as a starting point, is thinking about that connective tissue when you think across ES and G, and really ask yourself, what's that core idea that creates that binding kind of idea, way of communicating. The second point, which I highlighted off the top, is it's really important to have a point of view. And so often, again, as obvious as it seems, we find so much communication doesn't have a point of view. Thinking about it as almost a stance. What do you stand for, right? What's your perspective on this particular issue that you're communicating? I put this this ad of Eileen Fisher, because I think that company has done a very good job. It's very sustainable, as sustainable as fashion can be, with that caveat, but a very, very good job of being very transparent and talking about the challenges that they face and how to not create, in this case, any excuses for what they're doing to really green and close loop their supply chain. And so it's really, really important that if you want to have differentiation on ability, you need to have a perspective. Now, they're not the only ones saying this, but they have been doing it for a long time, and they do it in a very, very credible way. I also think that seventh generation is a good example of this point of view. In this particular case, it's talking about supporting youth who are obviously fighting for climate change and actions that need to be taken. But if you look at their brand and how they communicate their sustainability efforts, obviously at the core is thinking about how the actions you take today for 7 generations, but they have a very strong consistency and a stance around getting toxins out of cleaning supplies. And they have been very, very vocal in their advocacy efforts around it. And so when you look at any of their communications, there's always a very strong point of view that they're bringing to it, which is what has allowed them to build a very powerful, what I'd call tribe, audience, consumer set, who knows that this is an organization who takes this very, very seriously. One other example for you is the Body Shop. We had the opportunity to work with the Body Shop on a campaign, on this Forever Against Animal Testing campaign. But the reason I put it in is because, the Body Shop was one of the original sort of social purpose businesses, and has sort of, during the days when L'Oreal bought them, they sort of lost their way. Now that Natura has bought them, and who is also a B Corp, they have found their way back to sort of advocating. And what was really important is to put a point of view, and come back to one of the original points of view, which was around animal testing, which is kind of crazy that we're still testing on animals in certain markets. So again, when you think about your organization, how to communicate your sustainability, forcing yourself to ask, well, what is our stance on this issue? What point of view do we bring that is additive to the conversation is something I really implore you to think about. The third principle is around specificity. We have seen so much data around people's skepticism, and in some cases cynicism, on whether or not companies are really doing what they're saying. And as I referenced off the top, there's a lot around greenwashing and woke washing these days. And one of the ways to overcome that is to move away from generic language. We support communities, we create a better future, we're all about bettering the planet, right? And actually get into much more specifics around what are you doing, what are you trying to change, and being also authentic about where you are on that journey. So if you're going to talk about supporting communities, then talk to your audiences about which communities and why you selected those communities and what you're doing in those communities. If you're talking about reducing your impact, actually tell your audiences about how you are doing that. And the list goes on if you're talking about the planet. So specificity matters. I put this example up here in the Climate Take Back. Interface, it's a carpet company. And what I like about them is you can go, and they're carbon neutral on all of their carpets now. But if you go on their website, you can actually see that they give you reports on third-party certified on what they're doing, and they're very specific in their actions around carbon and living zero and leading an industrial re-revolution, as you see here, letting nature cool. They have a real specificity, which they're a very sustainable organization, and it gives credibility to what they're doing. Moving away from environment, but looking at sustainability through the sort of social lens, I've always been impressed with Airbnb and some work that we did with Airbnb.org. But I love the specificity in which they bring to saying we'll help 100,000, house 100,000 refugees fleeing Ukraine. And they've done that actually consistently since they've been working on the issue of how do you provide housing to people in need, whether that's natural disaster, human created disaster, or facing a medical emergency. Real specificity gives a sense that they are not just talking the talk, but they're walking the walk. And I also like what Volvo has done. This new initiative or campaign, A Million More, they talk about how they've saved 1 million lives through the initial technology of the 3-point harness seatbelt. And now they're introducing all other kinds of technologies in the car to protect people's lives. When you set goals like that, when you actually have concrete, and I'm going to talk about measurement a little bit later, but when you have concrete measurable actions that you're taking, and you can be really specific in what you're doing, it just breeds a level of belief and authenticity and trust in your consumer audience, or whichever audience you're trying to reach, that you don't get when you try to talk in generalities. Okay, so I've sort of referenced this before, but the fourth principle I want to talk to you about is transparency. And it's difficult to be transparent, and we're living in a very challenging world where, the moment you do something, there's someone on the internet who will go out of their way to criticize you. But I believe strongly that transparency is your friend, and the more transparent you can be, the more freeing it is, because it allows you do not, as we always say, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. You do not have to be perfect. What you need to be is honest, transparent about where you are in the process and where you're trying to get to. And so the more transparent you are, the more people, interesting enough, will give you leeway. It might seem counterintuitive, but if you are really transparent, some will criticize, but most people, most consumers will actually give you a lot more rope to see what you're going to do. And I like the example of Everlane, fashion company, where you can see how they design their clothing, the process that they undertake, what the cost is involved at every step. You can go and see in the factories where they operate and the way that they operate those factories. And so they brought this idea of radical transparency right into their business and in the way that they communicate it. Now, not everyone can be like Everlane, but I think there are different varying degrees of that everyone can bring to it. I like this example of Lemonade, a direct-to-consumer insurance company, who also has broken down in simple ways the transparency of their business model in terms of what the fee is, what does it cost in terms of claims and reinsurance, and then they have this model where they give back what's left over to community. So a very simple model, one of the principles, but also the transparency that they're bringing to it. I was teeing up simplicity. The next principle is around simplicity, because one of the things that's really difficult about communicating sustainability is there's an incredible amount of complexity to it. And too often, I think, and I think we're all guilty of this, we want the simple way to understand things, which makes great sense on the one hand, but we also want to oversimplify what are oftentimes very complex and nuanced arguments and actions around how do we live a more sustainable world. And in the sort of social media world we live in, you don't get that opportunity. So simplicity is critical, but it has to be balanced with this idea that there's a lot of nuance. And so if you get caught up in the jargon of the sustainability world, then I think what happens is you just end up sounding like everybody else. And I saw a recent study that actually just came out that talked about the high levels of confusion that consumers have when it comes to terms like net zero and carbon neutral. So we all when we live in this world, we all understand it, but most people who aren't thinking about this day to day don't. And so you have to be very simple in your communications, very concrete in what you're communicating, but you also can't shy away from the complexity. So I realize that there's an interesting tension there. Whenever you can, really default to just plain language, concrete language, the better. I put this example of it's a drink company called Vivo. who is really sort of their product is one where they have not a lot of ingredients, so it's easy for them to be simple, but they've really gone at this idea of transparency and simplicity in their communications. And I love Tony Chocolonely, the company who it's also a B corporation, who has really tried to go at the simplicity of, we have a chocolate bar that is trying to get slavery out of the supply chain in cocoa, right? And so it's in all of their messaging, it's in the design of their chocolate, and it's a very easy concept to grapple with, and it engenders a real loyalty to the brand because of how both direct and simple that they're being. The next principle, because I'm going to run out of time here, is I want to talk to you about the selection. So we talked about that complexity a moment ago. There is a tendency often in companies when you're communicating sustainability to want to share everything that you're doing. And of course, you just don't really get that opportunity, and it's often overload for people. So it's really important to think about, against your internal, external audiences, what is the most important, right? What are the things that you really need to communicate? And even though you think everything's important, you need to sort of self-select. And there's, generally speaking, there's a lot of research being done on the power of three, that people can generally hold 3 ideas, 3 names, 3 concepts in their head at any time. And so that's a good rule of thumb to think about when we're communicating. What is it that are the 3 most important things to communicate, and then do that in a very simple way. And I put the Danone example. This isn't just for communications, but I like the fact that they've taken their entire sort of business model and brand model and trust model, and they've broken it into 3 core things. So if you think about the complexity of a multinational like Danone, that they can do that across their entire business, certainly you can do it when it comes to communicating your sustainability efforts. And this is an example of Tiffany, and a lot of people have now gone here. But when you think about sustainability pillars, you see a lot of people, planet, product, or people, planet, partnership. The reason why we see this is because it is, again, a very simple way to hold on to structuring what you do across your ESG. A few more principles, and then I'm going to stop. It's really one of the I would say underutilized principles in thinking about communicating your sustainability and ESG is actually using your voice or your soapbox. Oftentimes it's about the company's voice, putting it out there, communicating to people what they want them to know. But there's a real power when the brand, both at a kind of a brand level, but also when the CEO or executives or people in the company actually speak out, when there's a person connected to it. And using advocacy as a means of communicating is very, very effective, because it's putting your words to action. Patagonia, as you see here on the right, Patagonia has been doing it for years. This is a tab that they put in a pair of a line of their shorts that got huge amounts of coverage. And this was about saying anybody who is not pro-environment and not thinking about ways to protect the environment and reduce fossil fuels should not be reelected. And they can do it in a tonality and an aggressiveness like both the assholes out, because Patagonia has such credibility. But they have used advocacy as part of their voice, their soapbox, for communicating sustainability in a really effective way. But there's other brands who have done it as well. On the left here, you see Levi's. Chip Bergh, the CEO of Levi's, has done, I think, a very effective job about talking about issues that are important to them, gun control being one of them. Also, waste reduction is a huge one that Levi's has gotten behind. But there is a CEO who's being an advocate, and it's led to Levi's being really recognized as a leader, one of the leaders in sustainability, because of the CEO voice on this. The one on the right that I want to share with you is Annie's. In this case, they literally put their kind of advocacy message and the education that they want their audience to understand right on the package of their macaroni and cheese. And so, different ways in which you can get your message out, whether it's on a package, whether it's on a tab of shorts of your product, or whether you use sort of more traditional channels. But thinking about how you advocate and using that soapbox is really important to demonstrate that you're serious about it. And in fact, both employees and consumers are looking to executives to speak out on issues. And of course, the one that everyone will be familiar with is Ben & Jerry's, who has been, they built their whole brand around advocating for social justice and environmental issues. And these are just a couple of the ones and they use obviously their packaging as well to do so. A few more and then I'll stop. A principle that I think is not being used enough, but it's, I would say, is a trend that we're seeing, and we're certainly advocating for this as a trend, which is how do you make your product or service the story? How do you innovate with your product or service to advance your sustainability? This example is something we worked on with Converse, where they are bringing, like many companies have done, a upcycled, recycled line of shoes primarily, but also clothing called Renew. And so the idea of life's too short to waste was a marriage between their core brand idea, which is about the daring spirit of youth, and the waste reduction actions that they've taken in how they manufacture their shoes and their clothing. And we put those two things together with this idea of life's too short to waste, to bring that spirit to it. The product itself, Renew, and putting that idea right on the shoes, as you see here, makes the story, bakes it right into the product. And so when you're thinking about how to communicate, what can you do from a more innovative perspective of your product or service, and how do you bake that literally right in? Two more examples of that. On the right, you see Fat Tire, the first carbon neutral beer company. And so, they have gone out with some very clever communications about talking about what the cost of beer will become because of the inaction on climate. And they've done a really, really great job. And they've done all kinds of campaigns that if we had time, I would talk to you about. On the left, you have Lacoste, who has done a really powerful campaign called Save Our Species, where they took the iconic crocodile and they've replaced it with the 10 most endangered species in the world. And they only produced a number of shirts connected to the number of that species who are left on Earth. And it's raised over $30 million for their nonprofit partner, but they have literally use their product as a communications vehicle. So where you can, not every company, not every organization can do that, but where you can think about your product or service and how you can make that the story, like Fat Tire has done, like Lacoste has done, all the better. And one last example, MasterCard, I think what they've done is brilliant with True Name, really allowing transgender people and other people who don't identify in one particular sex to be able to put their true name on their card. Just by that action, what that communicated and the incredible response that MasterCard got for doing this was quite something. So again, thinking about innovative ways to make your product the story. And then, of course, the last one that's so important from a principle perspective is to measure your impact. It's very hard to be an effective communicator of your sustainability efforts if you're not measuring it, if you don't actually know where you are along that journey and where you're trying to get to. This example that I put up is Maple Leaf Foods, a Canadian company. They're the first protein, net positive protein company, but they are measuring all aspects of what they're doing, from the food that they're creating, to the care of the animals, to the community, which is around food insecurity, to their supply chain, everything, and they're measuring all aspects of it. So they have a very rich story to tell because they have metrics to back up what they're doing. I think if you look at Microsoft as well, they've done a very good job of capturing, this is just one set of metrics. What it allows for is them to do things like a moonshot, where they've talked about this moonshot around climate and what they're going to achieve, but it's because they're measuring it. I look at Puma and what they've done with their environmental profit and loss, a really interesting way to measure and be accountable, and they did this, I think, back in 2011. So there's over 10 years of this. It's very innovative and has allowed them to communicate, I think, very differentiated from some of their competitors. So communicating this requires you to have very strong metrics, or at least start that. And then finally, the last one, I'm going to stop, is it's really important, as we all know, when we're thinking about sustainability and communication, that you play the long game. If you're just looking for the quick hit and the quick win, that's okay, but you're not going to get the kind of results I think you're looking for. Part of the reason Unilever has been so successful is they've been at it for a long time. So credibility and building up equity through your communications comes from actually really sustaining those efforts, because it builds over time, and people realize that you're not just saying this today because it's advantageous for you. You've been doing it for quite some time. And so Dove's Real Beauty is one example of a Unilever brand has been at the notion of real beauty, and it allows them to react in real time when things happen with credibility, because they've been at this for well over a decade. So I'll stop there. I had some steps on how to do it, but I'm conscious that I've gone probably up to my time. So John, maybe I'll stop there. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, terrific. That was really really insightful. Thanks very much. Definitely
Sure.
allows you to think about a lot of different things. I'm going to ask you a quick question, just in terms of, so yeah, I work for an accounting firm, and we
Yeah.
like to measure things, and I know there's been a lot of talk about actually having certifications done by auditors or other people, and there's been some pushback on that topic as well. Where do you sort of see that standing? And do you think that, I guess more importantly, do you really see that as going to drive change, or is that going to be like a compliance aspect that people are going to be like, ugh, I need to do another compliance task?
Right. It's a great question. I think it's actually going to be both. I do think it's going to drive change. I do think there's going to be a lot of laggards. I shouldn't say laggards. Well, yes, laggards, but there's going to be a lot of organizations who are going to be sort of begrudgingly have to do it. But there's no question that we are moving to standardization. I think we're much further along on the environmental side of the equation than we are on the social side of the equation as it relates to ESG. I'm involved with a great organization called Outcomes X, and the Human Genome Project, which is all about creating a marketplace for the measurement of social outcomes and putting actually a price, a credit on that outcome in order to be able to buy and exchange it on a marketplace like a carbon credit. I think we're going to see more and more of that kind of thing, because if we don't create a certain level of standardization, then it's part of the criticism right now of ESG investing, right? Some get, when you see something like Tesla and it doesn't make on one list, and you think, well, how are they not there? But a non-renewable energy company is. You question whether or not there is, standardization. So we need to get to standardization. I think it's going to take quite some time. I think we're early days on this, but if we don't both try to move towards standards, but more importantly, if we're not getting very diligent in how we measure outcomes, like real outcomes, not just outputs, but real outcomes, I don't think we're going to advance this work far enough. And it's too important not to. So it's definitely coming. You're seeing regulation happening all over Europe. We're seeing more of it in the US. I mean, York brought out a policy about 6 months ago, right, where companies over 100 million have to now start reporting on their fashion, right, on their sustainability actions. We're going to see way more of that coming. So either you get out in front of it and take it seriously, or you're going to be forced to do it, I think, in the matter of years.
Gotcha. So we had a couple of quick questions in the answer thing there. One of which maybe you can respond to just by typing in there, because they're asking about if there's a how to do it resource that may be available. But the other question, maybe while you're thinking about that, is someone had asked, can we get post-consumer waste paper? Can we get to 100% of that, since there is a worldwide paper shortage?
I mean, I'm not the expert on that. So do I believe we can get to it? I do, but I'm also declared, I'm a true optimist, and I actually think we will innovate our way out of the problems. And that's not to suggest we don't have massive problems or there's a reason to have some level of skepticism, but I do think we can get there. But it's a great question. I don't have the science to back that up or the actions. On the first
but
question,
it takes the whole village to get there too, right? So everybody has to weigh in. So
it does, and I think it's good that there's a real impatience on progress. But at the same time, if you look at what's happened in the last 5 years, I've seen a huge acceleration. I mean, we track it. We work with massive companies across, as I say, Canada, the US. There's huge progress happening. It's not fast enough. We are obviously in an existential crisis on the environment per se. But similarly on the social side, the gap between rich and poor continues to grow. We have massive problems in the world, but there is, and I encourage people to read positive newsletters. There's like reasons to be cheerful, and there's positive vibes, and there's future crunch. These are really good sources, because it's so easy to get inundated with all the negative news of what the problems are, but there's incredible acceleration happening on solutions. And the last thing I'll just say to the first question is, I mean, I'm happy to share this document, but the part that I didn't get to is kind of the how-to. So again, those principles, how do you do it? So that person has a question on that, I'm happy to share the document, and certainly happy to share
Sure.
sort of the steps you need to take from a practical standpoint to lean into those principles to be effective at your communications.
Terrific. That's great. Thanks very much for your insights there. Very helpful,
Pleasure.
and we certainly appreciate your time and effort there. So with that, we will sign off and say thank you again.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.